Good evening, everyone. Is that me? All right. Good evening, everyone. It's September 24th, 2024. We're here for a work session of the City Council. We're going to go ahead and begin with public comments on non-agenda items. If there's a member of the public who's wishing to speak to us on an item that is not on the agenda this evening, now's your chance. Go ahead and come forward in the room. Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment, move to our work session, which is downtown parking. City Manager.
Good evening, Council. Good to see you tonight. We are here to discuss the potential for parking modifications downtown. I have a couple other folks that will be presenting with me this evening. We have Zeb Coulter from our engineering division who's going to be helping with the presentation, and also a member of Kaiser Financial who will join you at the podium, both of them at the appropriate times. So we'll get started if the city clerk would like to initiate the presentation. As I said, we're going to talk about options for possibly adding more parking stalls into the downtown. Just to start off, I'd like to refresh our memory a little bit of the findings of the survey that the city conducted back in June. Next slide, please. We surveyed the community for a 2 to 3 week period in June. And what we were asking them about was the experience that they've had with parking in the downtown, and also asked about their sentiments about how they would like to see improvements to parking made if they desired to see improvements. When you look at the respondents that we had actually a tremendous response to this survey. It was, of all of the surveys that we've launched on specific topics in the last 3 years, this was the most responded to survey. Of those who responded, 80% were consumers or patrons of the downtown. We also offered a particular series of response categories that would delineate downtown business owners from people who own property in the downtown, or from people who reside in the downtown, or from people who worked in the downtown. So you can see how that broke out here. We were able to receive 80% response from patrons or consumers utilizing the downtown. We had basically 9% of the respondents were downtown business owners. 6% were downtown employees who work in that area. 1.5% were residents of downtown, and we had 1% of the respondents who were downtown property owners. As we looked at this data back in June, and I won't go into the specifics tonight, but we do believe that the sample that we received and the responses we received are representative of the overall makeup and mix of the community, including the percentage of business owners, property owners, employees, etc. Next slide. Council and Mayor, I would suggest that if you do have questions as we go through this, I'm happy to take them during the presentation, or if you would like to wait to strategic points in the presentation, I'm happy to do that as well.
City Manager, yeah, I'll just have councilors interrupt with questions as we go.
Okay, thank you so much. So looking again at the data, the really key question is, we said, what's your experience been with parking in the downtown? And we asked people to identify their top 3 parking issues, if they had any. And you'll see in the very top row there that many people said, well, I just don't drive to downtown, so I don't have an issue, right? And then they could leave the survey at that point if that were the case. But when we collated all this data together, what we found is that the most common response was people saying that they could not park within the desired proximity of their destination. So they couldn't park as close as they wanted to that restaurant or that retail space that they were looking to patronize. And the percentage there was about 60% of respondents noted that as one of their top 3 issues. The second most commonly cited issue was lack of on-street parking stalls. And you can see that was about 57%. And then there was a tie for third place for the third most commonly cited issue in downtown, and that was folks who said, I just don't encounter issues parking in downtown. And you see that in that second row, that was about 27%. So nearly a third of our residents really said that they didn't encounter an issue. But that was the third response. We still have those overriding two responses we just covered. And then the folks who said, well, I don't encounter a problem downtown, that tied for third place with the second row, yes, from the bottom, which was people citing seasonal concerns, snow impeding the ability to park or access the sidewalk. And I know that is no surprise to those of you on council, nor to any staff member. We certainly see an uptick in the winter of people expressing concerns about downtown parking, particularly when we get iced-in situations along curbs, and it can be a little sketchy, frankly, for people to get out of their vehicles into the sidewalk and that sort of thing. So we do see heightened concern about that aspect of parking in our winter months around seasonal snowstorm activity. Next slide. So last two slides here reminding us what our survey told us. So based on the top three issues that people saw, we then went to the next question and we said, well, tell us what improvements would you like to see, and what improvements would address the concerns that you have encountered as you've tried to park downtown. Based on their own experience, our community members told us that their preferred changes, the first one would be more off-street parking options. 1 in 2 respondents roughly cited that as the number one improvement they would like to see. And then the second most commonly cited improvement was on-street parking to be added through the use of diagonal parking stalls. You'll see also, so on this slide, the two circled areas that are in green are areas that the city has already started to address. As you know, Council, you've been working to revise the ordinance for parking fines. Enforcement is ongoing downtown, and staff are currently researching, and we expect to bring you in the fall, or excuse me, I should say in the winter, because it is fall now. In the winter, we expect to bring you some additional options for maybe technology that can help us to really maximize enforcement at the least possible cost to our taxpayers. So that's a forthcoming item, but parking fines have been addressed through the ordinance revisions that you just passed. For tonight, we're going to be focusing on the red circled areas, and these are really the top two improvements that the community wants to see. They cover that on and off street parking. The notion of a parking garage came up repeatedly in the 118 comments that were made in the free or open-ended section of our survey. A lot of people saying off-street parking through the use of a parking garage or a parking structure, and I'll kind of use that terminology tonight interchangeably, parking structure or garage. So we're going to move forward and talk about those two items in a little bit more detail, but I did want to share one more point on the next slide about our community data, because when after the presentation of this data to the City Council in June, I did kind of a deeper dive into the data to cross-tabulate and look at whether the response of, say, just patrons or consumers, people who patronize the downtown area, was different in any notable way from our business owners, our employees, our downtown property owners, or downtown residents. And there was a slight, it's not a strongly compelling cross-tabulation, but we do see when we cross-tabulate the response of those individual types of people who are using the downtown with this question about adding off-street parking, that the data does reflect kind of a strong demand from our downtown visitors or consumers, patrons of downtown who don't have a stake in that area. They really, really heavily favored more off and on-street parking options to a larger degree than did the downtown business owners, residents, property owners, or employees. So that was somewhat interesting. Our Zen City folks tell us that data shows that there is perhaps apathy to some degree around the question of what solution would be best applied in the downtown, and that apathy coming from those folks who are working, living, or owning in the downtown. Or it may not be apathy. It could just be that they were less engaged because they feel less satisfied with the current conditions. So you can read into that what you will, but it was an interesting cross-tabulation and one of the only cross-tabulations that had any meaning when we looked at the data set. This is probably a good place if you have any questions. If you'd like me to stop, we're going to move off of the survey data and into talking about off and on-street parking.
Thank you, City Manager. Council members, any questions at this point? All right, back to you, City Manager. No questions.
Okay, thank you. So, Council, building off of this information, then our entire point for this evening is to say, well, what could we do to address the concerns that the community has expressed and address the solutions that they would like us to take a look at and consider applying in the downtown area? So, as I said, the first of those was add off-street parking. And what you have in front of you is a picture of the parking garage in Cheyenne. I believe this is the structure that they built in 2003. This is where I'm going to ask one of our experts to join us and walk you through a little bit of information. Todd Bishop is the president and CEO of Kaiser Wealth Management. The city has a long history with Kaiser. They have helped us with nearly all of our bond financing initiatives for some 20 years, I'd say. They're also a good friend to Albany County. So Todd is well acquainted with how we have financed major public works projects in Laramie, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about ways that we could finance a parking structure, and then show you an example of Cheyenne's downtown parking structure and how they financed that now some 20 plus years ago. So I'll turn the podium over to Todd.
Thank you, City Manager. Todd, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. And thank you, City Manager, for those kind words. So to begin my presentation, I put together about 10 different potential financing options that are available. Not all of them are ones that would finance an entire facility, but I think possibly you could take bits and pieces of them, as the city of Cheyenne did, to maybe a combination of them would be able to put together and actually finance a structure. So I'll just dive into these, and again, very high level. Have some questions, don't hesitate to stop me, and I'll be glad to explain in a little bit more detail. The first option that I had put together was just revenue bonds. Parking facility revenue bonds, there's actually provided for in Wyoming statute, and these types of revenue bonds can be issued without an election. Somewhat unique, oftentimes with municipalities, even revenue bonds require public voter approval. Some of the advantages of these types of bonds is they are tax exempt. So they're issued at tax exempt rates, which are interest rates that are lower than what private entities could go and borrow those funds. Typically can be as much as 2-3% lower than what a private firm could go and do. A revenue bond does not impact the city's debt limits. So, it wouldn't adversely affect your ability to issue general obligation bonds, or wouldn't impact your ability to, your debt limits as it related to sewer, water, or some of those other areas. The revenues, they're primarily secured from net revenues that are generated by that specific project or facility. So you can take revenues that you would charge customers as they use it on a daily basis, or you could sell monthly or annual memberships, if you will, to park in that facility. If and when necessary, a city can appropriate non-tax revenues, such as 1% sales, 1% specific purpose tax revenues, or pledge its federal mineral royalties for up to a period of 10 years to enhance, to enhance that financing. And that's exactly what the city of Cheyenne did back in 2003 to get their project up and going. Once those bonds are issued, they can be repaid or defeased at a later date from, again, from proceeds of a specific purpose tax if you wanted to pay the whole thing off, whatever the case may be. One of the cons, I think, for utilizing that type of an option would be that the security for a revenue bond issue is weaker, than a general obligation bond pledge, where you're actually pledging property tax to repay that debt. So the interest rates could be slightly higher than they would be compared to a general obligation bond issue. It's leading into general obligation bonds. General obligation bonds, that is an option that is available for this type of a project. It would, a city can issue up to 4% of its assessed value to finance this type of a project. That, of course, does require voter approval. So you'd have to conduct an election campaign. You'd incur some of those expenses associated with the election campaign, and voters would tell you right there whether they'd be willing to pay for it with their property taxes. That can be a tough process. Special improvement or special assessment districts. This is another viable option. An improvement district can be established within the municipality's limits for the specific purpose of constructing a parking structure. Improvement district bonds in Wyoming, they're typically used to finance utility, road, construction, and residential commercial areas, but they can be used to finance off-street parking structures if that's what one of the items that you wanted to try to do. It's a fairly complicated process as far as preparation of resolution of intents. You'd have to have engineers and cost estimates. Those costs would be presented. There'd be sample assessments that would be given to all of the impacted property owners and where those improvements were going to be put into place. There's several public hearings, and it is subject to the public being approved by those that are impacted within that district. So it's just not a slam dunk that process would be and would work for that particular issue. I touched on this a little bit, but 1% from either fifth penny sales tax funding or 1% monies from a specific purpose tax project, you could certainly designate, a downtown parking structure, X amount of dollars, have that as a standalone ballot question on a specific purpose tax election. Let voters again have that choice whether they want to pay for it through sales tax. The obvious advantage of that is you're not specifically relying upon the revenues that are going to be generated from parking in the facility or meters to repay that debt. And as we know here in Albany County, I mean, the dollars that come into that are fairly significant, and so you're not talking about having a debt obligation outstanding for a 20 or a 30-year time frame. State of Wyoming community development block grants. I think that is another option to apply for funding. Again, not going to get all of it paid for through that option, but maybe a small component would be able to be applied for and maybe defer some of those construction costs. Lodging tax. I think there's a potential for the lodging tax in Albany County to raise money that could be used for payment of some of those a portion of that project. The Downtown Development Authority. I can tell you, and I'll go through it in my example, the City of Cheyenne, the Downtown Development Authority desperately wanted to have parking in the downtown area, and as such they were willing to guarantee the rents on X amount of parking places that the city could count on that revenue to be used to help defer some of the debt service. So I think that is another possibility. Let's see. The federal grant funding, Economic Development Administration. again, it's just another grant option that might go in to help deferring some of the costs associated with that. And then one of the last items would be mineral royalty grants, and I still call them Joint Powers Act loans. I think this would be of course, the grant that speaks for itself, but on the Joint Powers Act loan side, I think application could still be made, still subject to approval by the state. However, one of the advantages of that type of a loan would be, no election required, and you could actually have a 30-year payback on that type of a borrowing. The interest rate is typically subject to whatever the 30-year U.S. Treasury is, plus 2%. So if the U.S. Treasury at 30 years is a 4, they'd add 2%, so your cost of borrowing would be about a 6% fixed rate for that time frame. So I know I went fast on those. That's just a real high level, some of those sources that would be available. If there's not any questions over that, I would sort of just dive into how the city of Cheyenne financed their structure.
I have one question.
Yes.
And other councilors may as well. Can you tell me again, and you will almost certainly get into this, but how did the DDA in Cheyenne, what was their funding commitment? Did they have an active mill that was paying for these, or were they just committing as an organization to rent parking spaces? Maybe I misunderstood. But
Sure, they were using some of the mills that they were already receiving.
Okay, so they have active mills.
They already had an active mill in place. And then they were pledging, and I'll try to find it in this information that I've got in here for you. I'm not sure if this, do I click left or right?
Oh, right.
That doesn't, it's not pulling up my stuff, so I'll just talk from it. Is that on there?
I didn't see that.
Okay, all right, no problem. That's okay. So the city of Cheyenne, back in 2003, they issued $9.5 million in these, we called them refunding and improvement revenue bonds. And the refunding part came because they already had an existing parking structure over there. It was the Bob Cox parking structure. It was right next to City Hall. So we refinanced that obligation, and then we issued new debt to finance the construction of this particular project. So, again, $9.5 million was issued for that project. Just going down through that, let's see. I want to try to address your question, Mr. Harrington. So,
yeah, don't let me throw you off what you got. We can always come back to it later.
you bet.
You can email me afterwards if you'd like.
No, and I have it right here. There are a number of organizations that have expressed some preliminary interest in a commitment to have parking in the downtown area. And so the board of directors of the DDA at that time passed a resolution authorizing the leasing of 175 parking spaces in the project. They didn't state, it was for an unstated length of time, but they guaranteed a rate not to exceed, I think it was $75,000 annually is what they had pledged for those. So they would guarantee those parking spaces would be available so people could come to the downtown and park. Yes.
Councilor, please.
Do you have what the math comes out to be per space in your head? I mean, or in your notes, because I'm just wondering what kind of order of magnitude, and I couldn't do the math fast enough from just listening.
Well, 175
for one
spaces,
space.
$75,000 annually.
I can do that now.
Yeah. I can't do anything without a calculator
Yeah.
anymore. So,
Okay, thank you.
the Board of Directors of the Cheyenne Area Convention and Visitors Bureau, they also passed a resolution expressing interest in leasing up to 100 spaces for a 3-year term. Their term was at a rate of $420 of space annually. And that was contingent upon county lodging tax and that being renewed and some of those other factors. Now, remember, this is clear back in 2003, so I'm sure things have changed, commitments have changed since that time frame. But, you know, the city at that time, they were looking for and relying upon some additional sources of funding to help make the project happen, because it wasn't all going to cash flow just from people coming in and using their garage. And really, I think the key that got the project done was that they actually pledged their federal mineral royalties that the city of Cheyenne received, and they pledged that for up to a 10-year time frame. And when you took into consideration those monies, along with the pledges from the DDA and the Downtown Convention Bureau, that made it cash flow, or you could look at the numbers and an investor could have a reasonable expectation if they bought these bonds, they were going to get their money back, plus interest. That was the true kicker.
Councilor Gabriel, please.
Thanks, Mayor. Hey, Todd, I was curious, is there a possibility of using a combination of these, like revenue bonds, specific purpose tax, maybe some lodging tax money? So we have a project X amount, we're going to generate this much in parking, we need this much to run it.
You bet.
So, okay, we're going to go this revenue bonds, specific purpose tax money, lodging tax.
Absolutely.
Is it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You know, and that's really sort of what they tried to do here. One of the things that also that the city did afterwards, and I'm not sure if they did this after it was completed, but they moved their bus system to that structure as well. So that was like the primary hub for their transportation, you know, the Cheyenne transportation. So I know that they received some federal funding from that, and so they somehow incorporated that into, it wasn't necessarily tied into the bond offering, but they did that to enhance their ability to repay this debt down the road. So that's also something you could combine into, so you'd have a number of different revenue sources available to help finance and pay for this thing.
Thank you.
You bet. So I don't know that it's how important it is that I go through all this. I did include a lot of this information. Maybe I could go back to it's my page 18. If this works now. This might be too small to see, but this is sort of a nice sources and uses of funds, so you can look at, well, what did they initially use to get the project going? Of course, they issued the $9,575,000 in bonds. Those were sold to investors. They did have some grants and funds that were provided by the city from the Economic Development Administration. The city kicked in some cash as well. We funded a reserve fund out of the bond proceeds, and then they did earn some interest income on those bonds while they were being drawn down to build the facility. And then, as you can see down below, where did the money go? $8.8 million was used for the construction of the project itself, the parking structure. And then $978,000 went to pay off some old bonds that they had outstanding for another parking facility that was there. Then there was the issuance costs, and then we funded a reserve fund.
Mr. Bishop, do you happen to know, just so we can set this in a frame, we obviously can't build a parking garage for $11 million. My understanding is we'd be looking at maybe like a 3x of these numbers for our own budgeting, correct?
I don't know what the cost is.
You don't want to play an engineer on
I will defer to those experts.
Okay, we'll ask in a minute, but just for framing for the public, for council, those are not real numbers anymore. Okay.
No, these are once upon a time numbers.
Right, 2 decades ago, huh?
Yeah, yeah. But the numbers, I'm sure, will be different. Maybe some of the funding sources could possibly be the same, or additional ones added to make a project like that come to fruition. But, I left some of this information, just I'll let you read. You can learn a little bit more about what are federal mineral royalties. I'm sure that'll be really super interesting for you. There's no sense of me going into a lot of detail with that. But with that, I would conclude my presentation. I'll be happy to hang around, let the engineers give you their piece, and if you think of some other questions, I'd be more than happy to try to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop.
Yeah, thank you.
Any questions before he sits down? Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
All right. City Manager, are we back to you, or are we going straight to Mr. Coulter?
Yes, nope, we sure are, and we'll go back to the PowerPoint presentation. So just to kind of wrap around what Mr. Bishop has shared with you, for the city of Laramie, our federal mineral royalty revenue is about $700,000 per year, sometimes a little bit more. I've seen up to $750,000 per year, just to put in perspective. That number, since Mr. Bishop did talk about Cheyenne's use of FMR. The other thing I would mention is, of course, in Laramie, it likely would take a partnership of city and other entities, and who those entities would know, I do not. Who those entities would be, I do not know. But I think from the city standpoint, and given our financial ability, and the fact that we do believe that the cost of a parking structure or garage would be likely 2, 3, hopefully not 4 times as much as what 2003 prices were in Cheyenne. Given that factor, the city's ability to finance this solely on its own is there's a very narrow window for that to happen. So I think we would need to be looking at a community lift to bring something like this to bear, and that would mean partnerships with other entities. Like Cheyenne, we receive federal mineral royalties, just not to the degree that they do. We also have a tourism or lodging tax like Cheyenne and Laramie County does. What we don't have that Cheyenne had to bring this project to bear is we do not have a downtown mill levy. Our DDA has never successfully launched an election for the downtown folks to apply that taxing to themselves. Still always an option under statute, but the last election, I believe, was in 2006 or 7. That there have been 3 that I know of, and that last one in 2006-7 did fail to pass. So there are some tools that Cheyenne used that we have. There are some tools that Cheyenne used that we do not have. And I guess I'll leave it there unless you have any other questions for me, Council, on the potential for funding this parking structure.
City Manager, I should probably know this off the top of my head, but where are those FMR funds committed now?
Right now, Mayor, those are committed in the general fund as general revenue. I did look at our last year-end actual from fiscal 23. Jen Wade's in the room. I know she can correct me if I misstate any of these numbers, but at 750 or 743,000, I think was our collection rate. It was about 2% of the city's general fund. And of course, as you know, Council, the general fund pays for all the services of the city, from streets to public safety to administration to planning to parks and recreation.
Thanks, City Manager. Okay. Other questions, councilors, before we move on? Great. All right.
Okay, so just one last piece. If we'll go to the next slide, I have one last piece when it comes to adding off-street parking, which, as a reminder, was the #1 request of our citizens for changes to downtown parking that they would like to see. And I wanted to share this with you. So, of course, my mind goes to, well, 1, as your city manager, how are we going to finance this thing? And 2, where would we put it? And so one of the questions that we asked our residents was, what is a reasonable distance for you to park and be willing to walk to your destination in the downtown? And this is the results of that question, cross-tabulated by the type of respondent, so by business owners as compared to just patrons of downtown. Patrons of downtown are largely in purple, and you can see that the majority of folks who are patrons or consumers in the downtown, they felt that it was reasonable to park within 2 blocks of their destination, and then parking within 1 or 3 blocks wasn't too much less preferred, I would say. So when I look at this data and I think about what the general public wants, the folks who come downtown and spend their money there, I read this as they would like to see off-street parking added within a 3-block radius of their destination. And so when I just, plot the downtown in my head and look at the lay of the land down there, that says to me that this parking garage would need to be quite central to the downtown, likely on Grand Avenue or perhaps University or perhaps Garfield. So just food for thought. If we do want to move forward to look at how to finance this, I think we'd be wanting to look at a fairly proximate location to the heart of historic downtown. And then we're going to step off of off-street parking, and now we're going to move to on-street parking. So I guess if there's any more off-street parking questions, this would be good. Otherwise, we're going to talk about the geometry of streets.
I do have one question that maybe isn't going to be able to be answered right away, but there are a few particular lots, one of which was a topic of discussion for the city recently. The height of the building on that lot was, I think, the central concern for a lot of folks, sort of beyond the aesthetic conversation, which is for a later discussion. But it would seem that, Cheyenne picked 4 stories for capacity, but also probably for cash flow of the space, right? Like they had to have a certain number of lots to make any investment make sense. And I don't know if there's any way for us to know the height, because we were talking about 5 stories before and that was untenable. And so I don't know, is 4 stories tenable? And so that's a question that maybe I'll just leave with the council, but because I don't want to ask anybody to answer that question because I think it's maybe impossible on the fly, but I would be curious about that break even, like where we get there. Councilor Newman?
I have a comment to that, that same location as well for council to consider. Is the lot even for sale for us? And I was talking to city staff today, and maybe that's something that, if directed, council could direct city manager to even see in what that price would be for us. And there's a couple reasons. Yeah, we could put a parking garage there. I don't know how, to be honest, but I don't want in 20 years the current council having the same conversation. So that was something that I thought maybe we could, as a council, direct some city staff to reach out and see what those, because it's 2 lots, I guess, what those 2 lots would cost us.
Thank you, Councilor. All right. Anyone else before we move on to the geometry of downtown parking? All right. Buckle in, everybody. Where do you, Mr. Coulter? Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry. Go ahead.
Honorable
Right,
Mayor.
yeah, I went ahead and invited up Mr. Coulter.
Okay.
Thunder.
Thank you. Thank you, City Manager, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. Appreciate your time tonight. I don't want to belabor the point too much, so what I first want to direct you to on this slide is April 19, 2019, staff put together a great presentation, and I believe some of the council members in here were present at that, and hashed these out, and there was a lot of public engagement with that as well. A lot of the concerns, I think, probably that are still present down there were brought up during that time, so I want to highlight that as a great resource as well. As the slides that are also readily available. So to kind of highlight what staff did, just kind of looking back through, we obviously looked at the 2006 parking study downtown. It was a little bit larger than just the regular downtown area. So versus 6th Street, Sheridan to Clark Street, did a professional literature review, NACTO, City Lab, Strong Downtowns, and also the typical engineering resources that we'd use, AASHTO, ADA guidelines, that kind of stuff. Took in the best practices from that, looked at our constraints, which would be obviously our asphalt width, our right-of-way width, what we actually have to work with, because like you mentioned, there's clearly not very much to work with down there, especially with growth. So we have what we have, and so how do we work with inside those constraints? Fire access is one as well. And then we also looked at how are we going to make everything operate together, multiple modality. We have bicyclists, pedestrians, cars all need to be able to harmoniously work together. So how are we going to do that? And then, we were able to get a lot of the input from the businesses in that meeting, and from the community, from council members, and it was a great, I think, collaboration of thoughts and ideas. I don't think there was anything that came from it, except for there's a whole lot of stakeholders involved in this, and we have to be able to, work towards this solution, which I believe this study that the city manager presented earlier worked towards. The 321 First Street report was another part of this presentation, but that has kind of not a major part of what we're talking about tonight due to, I think, obviously everyone recognizing that the medians were removed from the next year's project from YDOT. So the outputs were, again, a lot of community comments, ideas, and talked a lot about, the parking, the enforcement, and then that multimodal access. So here was one of the ideas, which was run a one-way north-south and one-ways on east-west. And so that would have been alternating, for east, you'd go, University goes westbound, Ivinson north, back and forth, right? So you look at how you'd orient the diagonal parking stalls with that, and that would have been able to get, say, around 92 stalls added if you utilize both options. A second option was to only do First Street and Second Street as one-ways and still maintain the two-way streets on all the east-west corridors. And this would have roughly added about 60 stalls downtown. I do want to highlight that on Second Street between Fremont and University, as well as on Fremont Street between Second and Third Street. We've already implemented some of these already, and so that's a huge one we'll get to on the next slide. And so that was the picture on your left there is just a demonstration of what we've already done. So it's a little different than was displayed in the previous slide, but we were able to add, from these cross sections here, gain 11 stalls. So that's already working towards that, and without doing any one way at this time, we were able to add some. So this might be another option, be able to add some diagonal, but the constraints as you get further downtown really limit that. The Third Street median plan, like I said, since 2019 has been, it's a moot point. The guidelines that we work off as engineers, so the MUTCD and our ASHO have been updated. So that's going to remove, they're they add some more space, like less space for us as engineer, I guess as a city, more space for engineers. Like you want more room in your parking stalls, you want more room from your ADA. The guidelines have been updated, so it might actually reduce that number a little bit from the 60 or the 92 down maybe 10% or so of the number of stalls. So those numbers might not be as accurate today as they were in 2019, as well as the ADA, the federal ADA guidelines were updated in 2023, for on-street parking and how to make those accommodations for pedestrians and those looking to park. And then, again, I already highlighted the 11 stalls. The best part here is we are actively working towards some more solutions. So what we have here is a current design that the city assistant manager was able to get some design money for. We're hopefully going to be out for RFQ here shortly with a consultant, and we'll be looking at some ways to increase our parking on First Street between Garfield and Park Street. And one of those ways we'll look at is kind of to your bottom left. The constraint is we only have about a 35-foot right-of-way for asphalt. So we'll be looking at, does it make sense to put in some diagonals and a one-way street from Garfield to Park? Would that make sense? What would that look like? So that's going to be something we're going to have the engineer and consultant look at and bring forward for discussion on, does it make sense? What does it look like without it? What does it look like with it? And as well as that's the on-street part. The depot lot will also be assessed, hopefully be able to get some more off-street parking in that design and improve that, working with the UPRR as well. So that's upcoming, and hopefully you'll be able to be seeing that, the first round of that design early next year. In FY27, we also have some design funds to be able to go for not only water, our sanitary, and our storm street right-of-way evaluation. So we'll be able to do a design, and we're looking at a holistic design of what would it take infrastructure-wise to improve our downtown. And so and then obviously from there we'll have to budget through what would that look like, how much do we want to do Storm Street water, sanitary, how much all that needs to be done. But that is in the works. In about 2 years, we'll be able to start really gauging that on a holistic downtown level. So, and then we'll be, the most important thing I want to emphasize here is, like anything, emphasizing that public input from the beginning. So that is where we are right now, of where we were, what we've done, and then where we're going. So without further ado, I'll hand it back over to the city manager for this final slide.
Thank you.
Unless you have any questions.
Councilors, any questions?
Thank you, Zeb.
All right. Nope, over to you, city manager. Thank you, Mr.
Okay, so council, that kind of is the very quick version of how we might be able to add, excuse me, on-street parking. And as Zeb said, we're limited. The streets are only so wide, they're only so long, and they have to accommodate certain activities. This notion that was brought forward in 2019, I think Zeb is gracious when he says that it was a good discussion. It was a good discussion, but I think those of you that were on council at the time will probably also recall what I recall, which is that there was a lot of consternation around the notion of moving to one-way couplets. But because of geometry, I'm not an engineer, but this is how I look at it. Because of geometry, one-way couplets are really the only way that you can add on-street parking through diagonal stalls as opposed to parallel. In any case, this was not a popular idea in 2019, but seeing the results of this survey, it was my thought that we could at least touch base again, dip our toe in the water with you all, and determine if the community, if they really want to see more on-street parking, if there is now perhaps an appetite to look at one-way couplets as a way to increase on-street parking.
I'm going to interrupt you just a second, city manager, for a question from Councilor Gabriel.
Well, the city manager is talking about it, but I'm just curious, maybe from engineering standpoint, what is the negative aspect of going to the one-way couplets? I mean, these are pretty significant numbers you're talking about that would increase parking stalls. So where's the negativity here?
I'd be happy to talk a little bit about what we heard, Councilor Gabriel, because I think the question you're asking is maybe more about economics and less about engineering. But if the engineers have anything they'd like to add, they're welcome to do that. At the time in 2019, what we heard back from a lot of our business owners was a concern that one-way couplets would decrease vehicular traffic on the street in front of their businesses. And particularly for retail businesses, I think visibility and just passive drive-bys where people recognize your store, even if they don't stop and shop in it at that time, are considered really important to maintain the visibility of your business. So there was a lot of concern that there would be less visibility for the businesses. And then their concern was, how will that affect my business long-term? So I recall most of the sentiment that was opposed to this notion really being driven by our downtown business community, and rightly so, being probably aversive to a change of which the consequence they cannot know, right? And so I'll leave it there. There were other members of council at the time that this work session happened that are still on council, and perhaps you have observations about what we heard.
Thank you, city manager. Yeah, I mean, that rings true for me. But I was really young in my time on council at the time, and I remember feeling quite overwhelmed by this discussion at the time. Councilor Doherty?
Yeah, I remember that was why. I didn't remember that we quashed it. I thought that that was some of the comments, but it seems like that is something that you can learn from other cities. I mean, if I drive downtown, I don't go to the end of this. If I drive down Ivinson, I don't go to the end of the Ivinson and then pull a U-ey to leave. I'm still gonna drive on other streets. So I think it probably adds visibility, because now somebody has to get out of downtown, so they have to drive down your, if they want to get in or out, they have to visit, more streets, unless their way of going downtown anyway is just pulling a U-ey on the one street that they're going to. Me would be the chocolate shop. So anyway, I heard that complaint from a few people, but I didn't understand why that was such a powerful argument, because we would get a lot more parking, and I really appreciate, I've been noticing all the extra diagonals that you folks are squeezing in, and I appreciate the effort going into it.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Counselor. Anyone else before we go back to the city manager, or did you have anything you would like to add, Zeb?
Yeah, Honorable Mayor and council members, I think on the engineering side, it more dealt with, it really depends on what's done, right? I think the first option, it dealt a lot more with YDOT and the signal timing and maybe having to block off traffic at certain times from going down those certain directions, east-west. If you just do a First and Second Street north-south one way, from the city standpoint, it's engineering standpoint, it's not as much, it's working internally with the signals, and it's really just paint on the pavement and just redesigning, so the cost would be just getting the engineering design done and that associated. So not a huge, I think, cost up front just for that second option. But first is a lot more stakeholder engagement from the city side too.
Great, thank you for adding that, appreciate it. All right, city manager, back to you.
I will just kind of close this section out by saying I wanted to mention this at the beginning of the presentation, and I did not, but I wanted to let you know, Council, that we did make Main Street aware, and they let their organization know about this work session tonight. We also let the DDA know, and we also sent emails out to the 150 people who took the survey and asked us for follow-up information as we put this survey data to work. So we did try to blanket the community to see if we could get people in the room tonight. And if we are going to revisit a notion like one-way couplets to add diagonal spaces, to start that process of public engagement and see if there is any will to go this direction. I'll mention, just to close out the section here talking about on-street parking, that I'm, of course, attending the City Management Association conference this week. And one of the things that my colleagues would say, many of them from large communities with very metropolitan downtowns, is there is a body of data out there that says that the conversion in large metropolitan downtowns of two-way streets to one-way streets did have economic detrimental effects in certain communities. I know that was part of the conversation in 2019. It seems a couple folks raised that notion after just a quick Google search. I think that that's a fair thing that we would learn from the experience of other communities. But I will tell you, when I looked back at that data then, it did seem that really was more urban metropolitan downtowns and not our small 3 or 4 block downtowns. So I think that we would be wise if we continue looking at the addition of diagonal through one-way couplet to be mindful when we look at the comparative data from other communities to make sure it's comparable in size, like, and kind to Laramie's downtown. And we don't want to compare ourselves to downtown Denver or downtown Pittsburgh, where I'm at. So that is everything I had on on-street parking. Just echo what Zeb said. The cost by comparison of a parking garage to convert the streets to one-ways with diagonal parking is significantly less. It's a matter of engineering design, paint, and some coordination with YDOT. So that may influence your discussion about where you'd like to take this as a matter of policy. And then I have one more slide for you, and I think, let me see if Nancy is on that slide. Other considerations, the last slide in the presentation, Nancy. I did also ask engineering, because Councilor Newman had approached me with this question, and I thought we could just address it tonight since it's very topical. He did ask about whether it's feasible to convert parallel parking spots at the end of blocks where we've added those into maybe 30-minute loading, unloading, pickup, drop-off kinds of zones. And so I did ask engineering to take a cursory look at that. And their answer is that from a public works standpoint, it is feasible. But of course, the primary point of discussion will probably be about public input on doing that, and then also how we would enforce that. So that was a minor point of information that we did also glean from that June survey. It made sense to mention that tonight, maybe close out the conversation and let you know that is a possible option for loading it up. And that is everything I have.
Thank you, City Manager. Councilor Newman.
Before I get any hate mail, the only way that I would want this to happen if we could add other parking somewhere else.
Thank you.
But it was one of those things that I did hear the public say, or the downtown business owners even say, that they would like just some 30-minute drop-off, pickup kind of stuff. So I thought these would make perfect sense for that, but I don't want to take them away if we don't add parking somewhere else.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, though I think maybe a little softer on adding otherwise. I mean, I've been hearing about these, maybe not in this specific location, but some opportunity for, a mid-block loading zone or something of the sort. I've been hearing about that as long as I've been on council. So I tend to think it's a smart idea, right? Like if I'm going to pop in, here at the knothole that we were looking at from above now, I may only need 15 minutes, right? So it may be pretty advantageous if I'm not going to go eat or something like that. Like I might be able to pop in and get my pickup done. Or if I live downtown, I might be able to take my groceries or my laundry.
Right.
And then I can go park at a further lot.
So, and the reason why I picked these spots instead of the middle ones is I didn't, the people in the middle would be like, oh, well, we want 2-hour parking in front of our place, and I figured these were the best. I was talking to the vice mayor, I've talked to city staff about this, so it might be something that you see even before we add parking, and maybe not every spot, maybe catty corners, kind of trying to make it, at least try them out, so.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Doherty, please.
I really like this idea and having it on the corners because a lot of what I hear is and I deal with dropping off people who have disabilities. And so if I have a place that I can pull in and let somebody out and it's within a block of our destination, it really, and then I can go park my 3 blocks away, and then they're close to the ramp, whereas if you did it in the middle, and we know you get that big ice slope from the curb to the cars, but on that spot, you would have more opportunity to get out and get them to the ramp. So I love this idea.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Newman again.
And I think in the center ADA was something that popped in my head too, because if we put in the center, we would have to take another spot away. We'd technically have to take 2 spots away, so we would have a ramp going to that parking spot, was one of my other thoughts too, so.
Yeah, that's wise. Okay. Councilors, do you want to take this in a couple pieces? It was pretty dense as far as our discussion, and then I'll turn it over to the public in 2 different cases. Maybe one of them about the sort of one-way discussion, and then we could have a conversation about the parking garage option and that financing. Does that feel? Otherwise, I think we're going to get off topic and end up talking about one of these things all night. So I think we'll start with the parking garage, since that came up first, or off-street parking structure. Councilors, do you have any questions there that weren't addressed, or any discussion you'd like to have? Councilor Shumway, please.
This is certainly a wonderful thought to have a parking garage that has hundreds of spaces for the downtown, if we could find a central place to do it. But I don't think we've addressed several things that will come up. One is we don't have a mill tax dedicated for the downtown. The downtown has to yet not taxed themselves. The federal minerals royalty monies that come in would have to move away from the general fund to a specific purpose, as would the specific purpose tax would have to be placed for a parking garage in lieu of having it for infrastructure, streets, and all the things that we've dedicated that to before. I certainly don't think that there's any private individuals that are interested in building a parking garage, and even if it were back to the 2003 cost, I still don't think it would cash flow. And I'd be curious to know, because I've parked in the Cheyenne downtown parkings, they're seldom full, and I would be curious to see if that ever reached the point where they were able to get a return on their investment on that. I really like the idea that everyone has brought to us to have a parking structure, but I don't know how feasible it is for the city of Laramie at this time. Now, Councilor Newman said we don't want to be talking about this 20 years in the future. Maybe that's when we do want to talk about it, when things have changed to the point where that would be something that would be fiscally responsible. I don't see it being fiscally responsible until we adopt or defer other uses of the funds that come into the city.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Doherty, had you up next?
Yeah, about the only way I can see us funding a parking garage, but I don't understand how we really can afford most of the things we build, so I'm not the finance person. But if we had a special tax and put it to the taxpayers and say, hey, do you want to spend a 7-cent and have this luxury of a parking garage? I'd hate to pass up that money for other things, because we know we're behind in our streets, that the money we're pouring into now, we keep trying to keep our streets from getting worse, but it's not enough. So to me, it seems like a pipe dream, but then I'm not as creative as a lot of people are about financing. So I'd be open to it if somebody had some brilliant plan that we could adopt.
Thank you, Councilor. I'm going to go to Councilor Pierce and then Councilor Newman.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I agree with both Councilor Shumway and Councilor O'Doherty. I think we are a ways away from even being able to finance a parking garage, mostly because we haven't tried other things yet. And what I heard and have learned recently is that we've got business owners and businesses parking in front of other people's businesses, and there's a bit of animosity with some of the shops downtown, to be pretty blunt, and it's unfortunate. It's absolutely, the most unfortunate of circumstances. So until we actually start enforcing parking downtown and kind of getting people who actually work and live and downtown to actually park away from downtown, we don't even know how many spots we actually need or how many spots would be available. I mean, if we have people who work all day parking downtown in front of a business, they're either their own business or somebody else's business, how do they even expect a customer to find parking downtown? I mean, it's totally unrealistic to even think about this. So first I say, let's really get that enforcement going. And the whole idea of, well, I just want to walk 2 blocks. I mean, are you kidding me? That's ridiculous. People are going to have to learn that they're just going to have to walk a little bit more than 2 blocks. I mean, I remember years ago when it was Chris Boswell and they were working on all the stuff on campus, and he said, the students aren't going to be happy with all the new parking situation around campus. Faculty, staff aren't going to be happy. And they just said they're just going to have to learn to walk a little more. So now we have a situation where students, faculty, and staff are having to walk a much greater distance. And I think that's just something that we're just going to have to get used to downtown as well. I think, I was at a conference today for about 4 hours at the depot, and when I pulled into the lot to park all day, it was empty. So that was, in the morning, 9:30, 10 o'clock. And when I left, I shouldn't say empty, but there were ample spots. So, and when I left at 1:30, 2 o'clock, there were also plenty of spots for folks to park. So I think it's just a matter of changing some of our practices and how we operate in the downtown area. So, but aside from that, I mean, parking garage may appear to be an answer, but we've got other things that we could try, like the one-way streets and enforcement that could actually let us know, what sort of situation our parking is downtown. At this point, we don't even know if we have a shortage because every business owner and employee is parking right in front of the business that they work at. And that is really ridiculous because that's leaving no space for the customers to park.
Thank you, Councillor Pierce. Councillor Newman?
I just need to clarify, I did not mean building a parking garage now. I just meant buying the lot, just so we're clear. I reached out to Director Sherwood of Main Street and let her know that as well. We had a conversation about it, so I don't see how we could build a parking garage now, to be honest. But I just wanted to clarify, I did not mean building one now, just buying the lot.
Yeah, understood, and I appreciate that clarification. Obviously, the 20 years being when our lease expires on the
Right,
lot.
yep.
Great. All right, other questions, comments from councilors? I have a couple questions. I think there's no world in which this parking garage is free to park in, right? I can't imagine that there's a world in which we can afford to build a $30 million structure that's just a free service to the public. Okay.
Mayor, if you're asking me, I would say, based on what I know right now, that is true.
Okay. And the reason I asked that question, Council, is because I think that there is, this feels like the thing that if we just did it, if we just were like, fine, we're the council that does it, we throw $30 million and find a way to pile it together, we're that council, okay. But for one, I'm not entirely sure it solves the problem because I have not heard a lot of support for paid parking anywhere downtown. I've had business owners tell me paid parking would be disastrous because then there's sort of like a fee associated with shopping downtown, and that creates one more burden and makes it, just that much easier to go to, some online retailer that will not be named. But, I think if we're going to have a conversation about paid parking, then we should have a conversation about paid parking as it sits now without drastically altering our downtown in a way that encumbers the city's general fund revenues for 30 years or 20 years or whatever the math ends up being. And if we are going to go down that path, then certainly the DDA needs to do its statutory, it needs to engage in its statutory duty, which would be, adding a mill to the property tax of downtown business owners who I think are going to receive the sort of disproportionate benefit of a parking garage downtown, right? Like the greater public will pay for it, but those who receive money from people shopping downtown, because we know it's 80% of the people who are in our downtown at any given moment. So those 80% of people are not going to work to earn money. They're going to spend their money in the downtown. And so those people should have, the people who are going to benefit most from this should have the most skin in the game, I think. And I know that there is some interest from the DEA in having that conversation, but until they do, I'm not so sure that we should engage much in it, because it feels a bit like we could sort of get ourselves a little bit out over our skis on it. And so I guess my opinion would be we have places we can try to push on this and see if we can get more parking in our downtown available within 2 blocks. If that's what people want, we can try to open up parking within 2 blocks, but maybe it costs you $2 to park there. And that to me feels a whole lot more tenable, a whole lot more responsible for the finances of the city than us throwing $30 million at a project. So I tend to be pretty, I guess I didn't really know how I felt, but it's clarified through this conversation. I tend to be pretty opposed to it at this point until our finances change. And those finances could be that the tourism board shows up and says, we have a pile of money to build a parking garage. Things have been great with lodging tax. Or the DDA decides to add a mill to downtown. There's plenty of ways that could change, but until they do, I'm not so sure it's the direction we ought to go. Anybody else? Councilor Gabriel?
Sure. Well, from what I've heard here tonight, the most immediate solution to some of this is the one-way couplet. I mean, we can do that right away. I mean, it's going to be very minimal cost. It's something you can go back on and correct if it doesn't work. If we get with Main Street and work through the details on this, it's something that we could take a look at. I mean, there's significant numbers that we heard here tonight that would improve downtown parking. So I would like to see us, explore the possibility anyway, and take a look and get public response and see what everybody thinks.
Thank you, Councillor. That was a perfect segue into the one-way conversation, for sure. So does anybody else have anything they want to weigh in on one-ways or other sort of like layout of parking downtown? Please, Councillor Doherty.
I like the point that Councillor Gabriel made about you could change it. Whereas, if we build a parking garage, we're committed, and that's that. But the one-way couplets, it makes sense to me, and I would love to do some studies, and I know our traffic commission people probably would be, I'm guessing certain traffic commission member would be happy to sit there and clock, okay, people come in on this street, and then they go left or right, and I feel like people cycle through downtown anyway, that it's not like we have turnabouts at the end of every street so that somebody goes in the same way they come out. So I feel like that the business of losing business is interesting, and we should study that. But I also think that is more of a metropolitan thing than a town that just has really like 3 main streets down there. So I'm really interested in that one-way couplet idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman, please.
Currently I am against them. If they made sense, more downtowns would do it, I think. If the added spots that Assistant City Manager and I talked about today were implemented, I think we would not be having this conversation.
Where are those spaces?
So redesigning the depot lot, maybe taking some green space away from there, and kind of squaring up that whole lot. He's working on a couple other spots that UP owns, and seeing if we could lease some more spots from them there as well. So I would like to see how those conversations go before we talk about changing the structure of downtown streets. That's just my opinion.
Great, thank you. Any other council members want to add to this part of the discussion? Councillor Pierce, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I certainly don't disagree with what Councillor Newman mentioned in terms of working with the railroad to try to get a little more space there. But the reality is that's a tough sell. I mean, unless I don't know. I mean, we've been fortunate lately to have good communication. So if some miraculous thing occurs, I think that would be great. Sorry. I think that would be great, but I'm not convinced that it will. But I would certainly love to see it happen. Having been on council for a while and there in 2019, and hearing the discussion related to the one-way streets, I do recall it as being a rather busy council meeting that night, and I think we were pretty bombarded with upset businesses downtown, exactly related to what Janine was saying in terms of how are they going to get in front of my business? They're not going to be able to see it and stuff like that. But at this point, given the makeup of things overall, I think it's a real serious consideration because we can't seem to do anything right to please downtown other than repeatedly, no matter what the situation is, hear they're upset with us. So I think those one-way streets are a really, really good idea. And I probably did not think that, in 2019, but have since changed my mind, because if it adds 100 new spots or 90 to 100, whatever it was, I think that's great. And I think with enforcement and 100 spots, potentially, in other locations too, I think that would be a huge improvement to what we have now. So, and people are just going to have to get used to walking a little bit further than what they have in the past.
Thank you, Councillor Pierce. Councillor Newman?
I would go into it with, open ears to hear what the public had to say. Because I think one of and this is just something that I see with most of the stuff that we talk about, is we want parking, but we don't want parking next to us. We want housing, but we don't want housing next to us. So it's, it would be good to hear some public comment on some of it, and the way it looks today is we're not going to get some of that public comment, because there's about 3 people out there, and a couple on Zoom kind of stuff. So, but I think that's one thing that we would have to look past, is we want more parking, but we don't want to hear, or we want more housing, but we don't want to hear. Maybe there is the right spot. Maybe the one-way street is the right spot, right? So that could be something that would be good discussion to have with the public, and maybe putting another survey out with some of these. What do you think about changing, right? What do you think about changing the streets? What do you think about some of this other stuff that we've talked about? Maybe a second survey would be worth the money.
Thank you. All right. Any other councillors with questions or comments on the one-ways? I have a couple that I've held on to. The first one is for engineering, and I don't know if you'll know this off the top of your head or not, but is the right-of-way width on 2nd Street between, like, maybe where there is diagonal on both sides, so maybe that's like Ivinson and Garfield, maybe? No, I guess it goes all the way down to Kearney. Maybe not. Either, regardless, where there's diagonal on both sides, is that right-of-way larger than the right-of-way of, say, like maybe Ivinson, Grand Avenue, between 2nd or 3rd and 1st, where we have diagonal on one side and parallel on the other?
Yeah, Honorable Mayor, through you. So we actually, if you see in this slide here, we have, it kind of does show the widths, and let me get to it. We have a backup slide right there. So that actually does show all the widths. Okay. Yep, absolutely. So we have varying widths. I believe that's 52 feet through majority where the green is. You'll see the yellow gets a little smaller, the blue's even smaller, and then First Street is really restrictive. So, and we have the different cross sections. So there I can.
No, this is great. Yeah.
So yeah, there's varying widths, and there's different things we can do with those. So
okay, and I had wondered, I mean, the reason for my question is because what we saw in the survey that was sort of like the 80% of people using downtown, or sorry, not the 80%, but the main interest was to have parking within, if we're generous, 3 blocks. Most people said they want to park 2 blocks. So that means we're talking about the streets that are green. Largely, that's like majority of people are going within 2 blocks of the green streets, right? So, is there a reason that we can't have diagonal parking on both sides of the streets on the east-west streets, so Grand, Ivinson, etc., where we currently have sort of like the diagonal on one side, parallel, and then the shift of traffic? Is there a reason we can't do that? I know it's congested, right? And so I think there are moments driving down 2nd Street where you're like, you're coming and there's like a semi or something that somehow got lost down there, or even a pickup truck. But then there's a pickup truck parked on each side and you have to wait. But I've also never seen a crash on 2nd Street, and the chief might say, oh, they happen all the time. And I just have been lucky. But
I think a lot of that, Mayor, Honorable Mayor, through you. So I think what we really have is just a lot of approaches. So what really hampers us, and when we even looked at the 11 spots I showed you in that segment through here, is you'll notice even on Clark Street, which is the top right section, we couldn't increase any of that parking because of just all the approaches from the driveway. So all those things do matter. So and what you do see is in that further downtown, they're just all businesses, and then the intersection, and then the only approaches are the alleys. And so when you get further and further away from that downtown, you increase the parking lots or approaches to businesses and stuff like that, which decrease your amount of parking spots. Does that make sense?
Yeah, understood. And so there's, in that core area, I guess it's specifically, like, I'm not so concerned about adding both sides on Custer Street. Like, there's some benefit, but maybe it's like too far. I'm interested in like Grand, Ivinson, and Garfield having diagonal on both sides. And there are a few approaches, right? Like there's the BMO Bank or whatever it is, a few things like that would interrupt it. But there is largely, I mean, most of those blocks are I'm racking my brain right now. There's only a few approaches. There's blocks that I think have no approaches other than the alley.
And are you asking if we can maintain the two-way wall doing the diagonal, or just because this is an example of the one-way, and that would have to be analyzed. I think we could gain a few spots, but I don't know how many. So I'm not saying that we could definitely get any. Like again, I go back to that Clark example. There, we looked at it and there was absolutely no way. Even there wasn't a way to increase it.
Yeah, we all had high hopes for what could happen with Clark.
Yeah, exactly, and it's really just going to have to be sitting down and getting into AutoCAD and being able to lay out the dimensions and see what we can do.
Okay. Yeah, I would be curious to know. I mean, in sort of the core of downtown, if we could add that. I know that some of that shifting is for traffic calming, but I think if you're quite congested, there's some traffic calming as well. And those are small travel lanes. They are just, but the council could have a conversation about not allowing pickup trucks to park in some of those streets, right? Like that would be, and then pickup trucks have to park further. So you might choose to drive your car downtown instead of your pickup truck. I'm not saying I want that, just to be very clear, but I think it's worth considering, right? Because that's like a much lower inconvenience than charging $2 for every person. So I think maybe we ought to see if it's possible, because it's possible on 2nd Street. So I'd like to see if it was possible otherwise.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any follow-up questions from that?
No, I think that's we got where I was headed. Thanks for bearing with me. Wasn't sure if I was going to get there. I did have a question for counselors. Those of you who said you supported, and I took notes, the one-way conversation. Are you talking about all of the streets being one-ways or just the 1st and 2nd Street couplets? So Counselor Gabriel, do you have a preference? You're one of those yeses. You're the first one on my list. All of them, you just want to hear about both?
Yes.
Counselor
Start the discussion with a lot of different possibilities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And Counselor Doherty?
Not specific streets, but bring it to the public and say, this trade-off, if you put it in terms of, we could get 72 more spots if we did this. And
Okay, thank
not
you.
specific.
Counselor Pierce, does that jive with what you were thinking as well?
Yeah, it does. But just to remind Counselor O'Doherty, we did that once in 2019 and they said no. So I'm not sure if we're going to have any different results this time around. It'd be great if we did, but I don't know if we will.
Thank you, Counselor Pierce. All right. Counselor Shumway, do you have something to add? Please.
Here's my preference. I want to start with parking enforcement, then go to these off-site lots that we're talking about acquiring and utilizing, see how that improves the situation in the downtown. I want to have the third option is the one that you're talking about, and the one-way couplets and things like that, because that's something that we can't really get to until it's time to, when the snow stops, which will probably be next June or July. But I think we need to start with something that we can see some improvement and then see what more is needed. At that point, then it may make sense to add the 77 new parking spots or to look at something else. But I think just take it one step at a time instead of trying to bring them all in at once and then not knowing which solved the problem or if any of them did.
Counselor Shumway. Anyone else before we go to our patient public? All right. We're going to turn it over to the public, and you can comment on either any of this discussion? Mr. Matamore, did you have something to get us started? Please. Despite us knowing we'll need your name for the record, and you'll have...
Honorable Mayor, my name is Tom Matamore. Councilors, thank you. I had a business downtown for 26 years. Parking was always a headache, but I think that if we build a parking garage, it's a white elephant. It'll cost us a fortune, and we may not even need full capacity on it for 20 years. If we go with the one-way street parking, I have lived in Albuquerque and actually had a business on a one-way street. Since it was already there, nobody minded, right? Changing something now might get a lot more opposition. I'm with Councilor Shumway and think we need to phase this in and start with enforcement, expand what we have. But then you can go to them and say, okay, you still don't have enough parking, then let's look at the one-way streets. And the other point I have is in 2005, I was paying $60 a yard for concrete in the truck delivered. In 2016, when we built that building, we were looking at $75 a yard. 3 weeks ago, we paid $200 a yard for concrete. Now, that may go down or up depending on the economy, but I'd say you're looking to build what Cheyenne has, would be 4 times what they paid for it, would be a reasonable estimate, and if you could even find somebody to build it. And I think the one-way streets, out of everything, I would say before you build a parking garage, do the one-way streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matamore. Appreciate you taking time to be here. Chris, go ahead and come forward, and then we're going to come to you, Nancy, on Zoom. Just need your name. You'll have 3 minutes.
I did it. Chris Stratton, 1569 North 6th Street. I have a few ins to this. One, definitely University of Wyoming, they park off blocks away. They have a bus system. We don't. So coming to the aspect of going downtown, I myself will take a 2-hour drive to go to Fort Collins, where I can park, and go 2 blocks away, or a 30-minute drive to Cheyenne, rather than going to our downtown, because one, there's more businesses that I can actually go to. 2, it's the inconvenience, and I don't mind taking a drive to go to Cheyenne, etc., and pushing that end. The other big end to this that I would highly recommend is if there is a possibility to make it so that it goes to a ballot vote rather than to council, where, unfortunately you guys have the Business Alliance, etc., that comes up here and talks all the time and pushes that they don't like it. Unfortunately, that's not the view of the public itself. I would actually love to see it go to a ballot so that we all have a voice and we're able to go, yeah, we would like to go for one-ways, etc. I think the one-way items work real well. That should be decent, because you're pretty much doing a one-way trip in downtown anyway whenever you go downtown. That's about all that I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. All right, Nancy Sindelar, you are up next.
Microphone. Am I on?
We got you.
Thank you. 3 minutes. Okay, I was at that 2019 meeting. We had overflow in the basement. They were asking people after they spoke to step out so others could come in the room. And the number one complaint was that it drops the value of your business by 15 or 20%. That is not a viable option. The one-way couplets. I spent this afternoon looking at the Stanford fire maps from 1907. That big parking lot we've got where they were looking at putting an apartment complex, every lot on that block had a building. Chinese laundry, buggies, a bakery, a cobbler, oil storage, all of that was down there. The same is true all along First Street to University. Downtown ended at University. North of University, there was very few buildings. Instead, yeah, that was 20 years before we had cars. And the far end of town was 9th Street. Most people walked downtown or rode a bike. We didn't have scooters. We didn't have skates. We didn't have a lot of that stuff. Instead, let's make it so it's nice to walk downtown from, say, 6th Street or 5th Street. Put in bike lanes that are wide enough, i.e. narrowing the auto lane, make the bike lanes come all the way downtown. I've written to all you counselors about that. Make sure there's trees along the blocks. Make sure the sidewalks are smooth so people think it's a good idea to park up by the courthouse or up by, the Ace Hardware and walk downtown because it's a nice thing to do. It won't cost $30 million or $40 million. You could do a lot of it for $1 million or less. Some of it's paint. But just fix up what we've got so that people want to walk downtown. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sindelar. Anyone else wishing to comment to the council, come forward in the room or raise your hand on the Zoom call. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. Councilors, any parting thoughts here? Councilor Doherty, please.
I want to say that I like Councilor Shumway's idea, so that do it incrementally.
Great. Thank you for adding that. All right. Folks, we'll go ahead and close this work session and move on to updates and comments. Thank you all. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for coming over. Appreciate that.
Okay. All right. Councilor Gabriel, come to you for updates, comments.
Thank you, Mayor. I attended 3 meetings, although Todd's probably going to say I didn't attend the entire meeting for the Park, Tree, and Rec Board, but I was there as much as I could be. And also attended the Tourism Board meeting, met the new director, Andy Jesperson, and also the Railroad Depot Board. That was last week, celebrating their 100th anniversary next week. It'll be Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Lots of activities associated with that celebration, and it's an off football weekend for the Pokes, so I think we're going to have good attendance for that next Friday, Saturday, Sunday at the Railroad Depot. That's my report.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Newman?
No updates.
All right. No updates from me other than several of the council members attended a swearing in at PD. So we have one more new officer joining the police department. It was nice to see so many folks there. All right, Councilor Pierce and then Councilor Shumway.
Yeah, no updates for me. Thank you.
Great.
No updates.
Okay, Councilor Doherty.
No updates.
All right, Councilor Somerville. Okay, no Councilor Somerville. All right. So, council members, agenda review. Let me remember what I'm doing here. Okay. I stole all of Councilor Pierce's agenda documents and got myself confused.
Mayor,
Please.
if I could just give you a quick update.
Thank you.
I don't know if any of you saw the Facebook post that Owen worked on for us, but we did have a youth council member go, as well as Micah Richardson, present a couple of the counselors from the high school and middle school the rec center passes that you all approved. And so I just wanted to point that out. They did post a picture of Madison Newman and Counselor Jason Utterdike on the webpage. We didn't get a picture with Whiting's principal, but all of the counselors were very appreciative, and they said they would pass along any successes that come from those to us so that we can share that with you.
That's great. Cool. Thank you for that update. I remember seeing the calendar invite for those and missed it, so I'm glad it went off. That's how Madison thanks to.
She's gonna be mad I didn't say something.
Yeah, that's all right. We got to hear it from Nancy, who deserves the chance to speak to it. All right. So folks, on the agenda review, I have 2 items that I want to bring up to you. I can pass these around, but there are, staff has requested these 2 letters of support, one of which is for a significant project to modernize the Mountain Cement Company's plant. The other one is for a proposed affordable housing project. I'm going to go to the Assistant City Manager if you got anything to add to either of those. I would propose them all on the consent agenda, so I'm going to run them by you first.
Yeah, quick update on the Mountain Cement is they're modernizing the plant, and the reason they're requesting the letter of support is for an application to a GC8 grant. I can't remember if that's the right numbers, but basically it's going to reduce their greenhouse emissions by 20%, plus it has some impact on their actual production of the type of cement they're going to create, which reduces not carbon emissions, but a carbon footprint by 50% in that capacity too. I just thought it met some of the city's goals related to 2020-14, the resolution, reducing carbon emission goals, and the adoption of the carbon emission reduction plan. Even though it's not the city specifically, it's an entity that's in concert with what we're doing. So.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager, and we certainly have the goal of the entire community being carbon neutral. So, all right, and then the other one is just an affordable housing complex that they're looking to build somewhere, potentially on Boswell. So, without objection, I'm just going to throw those on the consent agenda, and if anybody wants to read them, I've got them here. So, otherwise, you've got an agenda. I'm just all over the place tonight. That you all can look through real quick, and if you have questions.
Just as a, number 13 might be pulled, if you saw the email to the Finance Committee. Yeah, so, just so you guys or the other counselors are aware, Director Rhodes has found a different place maybe to get this done for a lot cheaper that doesn't take council's approval. So it looks like it might be going through Finance Committee. So just in case you don't see that.
I'm glad you pointed that out. It was buried in my inbox.
Yeah.
So, great. Thank you. All right. Anything else, counselors?
How about number 22? Can you shed any more light on that?
I sure can. Yeah. So this would be in recognition of the change that a sign shop is no longer quite the thing that it has been previously. So this would be to allow, it's spurred by a specific project of a sign shop wanting to be in a zone that it is not permitted in.
Oh, I see.
But because a sign shop is largely like sort of printing vinyl that will then be placed on metal now, instead of sort of like constructing real signs, big signs, that the use may be suitable to be changed, to be sort of like allowed in other zones it's not currently allowed in. So that is what that ordinance is all about.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Other questions, councilors? Oh, thank you. Councilor Pierce.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Is Project Jupiter plenty?
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, other questions? All right, folks, we are adjourned.